talking. I am Professor Jorma Rantanen from Finland. I've been working in occupational health field for more than 40 years. And my longest affiliation was as a Director General of the Finnish Institute of Occupational Health, which is a relatively big multidisciplinary institute for workers' health and development of work life in Finland. What I can see briefly is that the development in occupational health has been tremendous, particularly in the industrialized world. USA, Western European countries and Japan, for instance, have done marvelous progress in safety and health. Just one indicator, the rate of fatal occupational accidents have been reduced by 50% during that period. In Finland, more than 85%. So we really have saved a lot of lives. And now the emphasis is moving from accidents to occupational diseases, and partly asbestos is there, a very important topic.
Can you please tell me about the 1997 Helsinki criteria?
First, why those criteria were generated, it was the fact that a huge number of asbestos-related diseases remain even now unrecognized, undiagnosed and unregistered, and it also leads to no compensation for the workers. So we wanted to guide the medical professionals to learn to diagnose properly asbestos-related diseases. And even in Finland, which has been relatively early active in these issues, it had an enormous impact in increase of diagnosed occupationally related asbestos diseases. So we have seen the impact not only in our country but in many other countries as a consequence of launching those criteria.
What changes have you made in 2014 to the Helsinki criteria?
Yes, probably the main change was in the recognition of 3 new asbestos-related cancers, which we took into consideration in the present criteria, which were not so well established in 1997. It is the larynx cancer, ovarian cancer, and then the very nasty disease, rare but nasty disease of retroperitoneal fibrosis caused by asbestos. These 3 disease entities were considered now and guided for diagnosis and attribution. Some other criteria were also, let's say, strengthened, not changed, but strengthened on the basis of the recent research achievements. Some more diagnostic criteria were added, but they are mainly just complementary information, and the main criteria, for instance, in the recognition of occupationally related asbestos lung cancer is the reliable and well registered exposure history and then the clinical diagnosis of the cancer. And then we can combine this information, and that is the basis for attribution still after the 2014 criteria. First, we were also producer of asbestos once. We had 2 asbestos mines which were producing antophyllite, which is quite risky stuff also. And first we started to learn from the world, partly Professor Selikov's works and other international colleagues, that asbestos is really carcinogenic. And that stimulated our own scientists, probably Professor Merman was doing epidemiological research on our own asbestos-related cancers. And that led us to alarm the authorities and also industries. And it was some way combination of economic developments and the health risk assessment which led to closure of our asbestos mines in 1976. And that led then the discussion of all kinds of asbestos-related diseases in Finland. And as we had both the international information on carcinogenicity, pneumoconiosis were very early determined already, but cancers were really very important. It led, let's say, activation of all layers of the society, trade unions, authorities and general public to learn more about asbestos risks. And probably that was the reason why Finnish government, in fact they ordered me to chair the asbestos committee in Finland in late 80s and early 90s. And we did a very, very extensive work. We proposed 35 different proposals for 8 different jurisdictions, covering the whole society, which had something to do with asbestos. And we proposed, number one was of course total ban of asbestos. And then many other actions in different sectors, waste handling in the environment sector, and social security issues also concerning compensation and so on. Occupational safety and health, provisions for securing not only ban but also proper protection of people doing abolition work, removal work in buildings and in industries and so on. So it was a very comprehensive package which was unanimously accepted by government, and it was also very well passed by the parliament, and that led to our, let's say, new era in Finnish asbestos policy. But I would like to say we were not the first ones. Other European countries were very often. Sweden has been very early out, Norway as well, Germany as well. So we were following very much the general European trend. But what I would like to emphasize, Professor Selikov's very, let's say, breakthrough results in the 50s. In fact, he started already in 40s. They were the real scientific basis for what we did. I would like to say that I have been working in research in several fields, starting from basic molecular biology and biochemistry, and then going to the more, let's say, applied types of sciences. And therefore my production is probably a little bit heterogeneous. I think it would be called also multidisciplinary in character. I have more than applied research than basic research, and in fact I have a lot of papers which are not totally scientific, because I have always been following Professor Selikov's footprints in not only focusing to research but also looking at the applications in the society and in the practice. And that has led that I have written quite many also that kind of professional, practical oriented papers. Asbestos has a certain part, occupational cancer in general has a part, toxicology part, but I have also been doing a lot of more general occupational health service development articles, and also according to the EU Commission request, I focused in the time to information society issues and work in the information society, which was one of the, let's say, spin-offs of ours. We have a little bit different societal systems in Europe and in North America. You are so-called adversarial society. We are very much consensus society in Europe. And that has an impact in these issues, because we have a strong social security and social insurance which is fairly compensating the occupational diseases. So the poor worker doesn't need to go to lawsuit, to raise the lawsuit against his employer in order to get compensation. We have made kind of fair solutions in that. Partly in Finland we had a special fund for compensating asbestos-related diseases, and all the insurance companies are collecting money, have collected already money for that, and that fund can be used for compensation, so it doesn't lead to court cases like here. That is something which is very important, because asbestos victims, asbestos patients, have not self-inflicted their risk. They have done their daily job in order to produce both GDP and sustain their families and themselves. And in connection of that, they have got a risk. It is totally different risk from, let's say, alcohol risks or tobacco risks, because they are in certain extent self-inflicted, but this is not. And therefore the justice in case of asbestos patients would be extremely important issue, and it is a societal responsibility, but of course the responsibility of asbestos industries and producers. To your question concerning the experts who are not totally independent, I feel sorry about them, because they have to have an enormous internal ethical crisis in their minds. They are first physicians and medical people, health people, and they rule the Hippocratic law on ethics in everything what we do. And then they some way in the position they take another, let's say, priority, which is not fully in concordance with the ethics of our profession, 2,500 years old ethics in our profession. And that must be a very difficult situation. And I think I used to speak about ethical competence. We have to know what are the key ethical principles which never should be compromised. And I think they don't probably always understand they are compromising. I feel a little bit sorry about that.
Can you briefly describe what those ethical principles are?
Yes, they are really, as I said, 2,500 years old. One very important is that you do good, you don't do harm. That is the golden rule in medical ethics. You have to assess also the balance between benefit and risk, so that maybe some of your actions cause some risks, but if the benefits exceed the risk, you are authorized to make the decision. Third important thing is that you are making all your decisions and choices on the basis of your professional knowledge, best professional knowledge, and if you don't know what is the best solution, you consult your colleagues and get so-called second opinion in order to certify that you are on the right track. And that is the third one. Fourth is very important also, that you don't permit any external force or power to influence your decision. You are independent. And fourth, of course, you keep always in mind these high values of medical ethics, and you never compromise any other. And sometimes it has been in countries a little bit problematic, because for instance government has been trying to push, or some other strong force, industries often have tried to push the medical doctors to do something else. We have a very painful history from Europe in 30s. And in that situation you sometimes may be also in the position you have to think what is leading your activity. Is it government stipulated law or your medical ethics principles? And my advice is that the second one is the most important reading. Even the case you are pushed to do something else, you do on the basis of your own judgment. How to be strong enough to do this, that is very important issue also. And my advice to my younger colleagues have been always that the highest possible competence is the best protection of your independence. So the more competent you are, the stronger you are to represent your values. So that is my advice.
How many Finns lose their life every year to an asbestos-caused disease?
Yes, it has been waning a little bit as a consequence of our medical and policy actions. At the moment, about 150 workers will get asbestos-related cancer are diagnosed for that. We may have a slight under diagnosis, but not very substantial. We have tried to keep it as intensive as possible. About 50 of them annually are mesotheliomas, and about 100 are lung cancers. And ratio between mesotheliomas and lung cancers is I think, too low in Finland. I think we have more lung cancers, but they are not as effectively recognized as the mesothelioma, which is a kind of indicator cancer for asbestos. And mesothelioma, lung cancer needs some, let's say, interpretation which is more complicated than in the case of mesothelioma, as we can practically say, for practical purposes, that all mesotheliomas are related to asbestos in the work age population.
What's your fondest memory of Dr. Salakoff that you have?
Probably when I first time met him, it was in Norway. That time we were discussing less asbestos. It was in mid-70s. We had a solvents in metal industry as a topic for the conference, but of course, as we happened to meet each other's discussion was very quickly also in asbestos, and we had a very interesting conversation on what we should do, what Finland should do, what could be globally done, and also what USA is doing. What I always admire in Professor Selikov, in the case he was a very, very competent and frontline scientist, not only in asbestos but also in clinical tuberculosis treatment. He never forgot to look at the practice, and he never forgot to look at the public health impact. So he was simultaneously top scientist, he was a strong advocate for public health, and he was also practical implementation, taker of the results of research in, let's say, everyday practice of it. And that's very rare that people are really covering all those. We have some examples. We have John Snow from England, who in fact is a founding father of public health. We had Robert Koch, a cholera researcher who was even Nobel Prize winner in bacteriology, but he went to India and Egypt to make public health work also for prevention of cholera. And the third one is Erwin Selikov. Sometimes governments may think they are covering everything and they are the most important one. They are very important one, because partly in the risks like asbestos, which are life-threatening risk, so-called soft legislation and soft regulation doesn't work. It is ineffective. We know that lesson from tobacco very, very well. We need hard legislation which is protecting basic assets of human beings, their life, their work ability and their rights in the work life in general. And that is the government's role. And it cannot be delegated to anybody. And if government is slipping from this responsibility, it's also a very serious issue. So governments have to take their governance and keep it and protect the people in case, partly in case of these high risk phenomena like asbestos. Many others are also there. Then it is not enough. We need first authorities implementation and inspection, enforcement of what government has decided and regulated. Then we need experts who are, let's say, knowledgeable to do and tell how it is done in practice and what is the scientific evidence behind to do something. And then we need, let's say, mobilization of social forces, and there the NGOs are coming to the picture. They are independent, they are very, let's say, quick, they are covering big groups of people, and they are extremely effective in publicity issues, like ADAO has been in US. And therefore, without NGOs, we would be absolutely less effectively. One of the type what we think also are NGOs are trade unions, and they are of course very important, but they are more organized, and at least in Europe we have a tripartite system according to the ILO principles where governments, employers and workers work together. And it has been extremely fortunate policy we have had in Europe, and it is also a very strong principle in occupational safety and health in European Union. It is one of the key instruments to implement so-called European Social Charter, which is one of the probably strongest instruments in the world for social policy in general and occupational safety and health, particularly even mentioned in the Constitution of European Union. European Union has that principle of high level of protection. It is covering occupational safety and health, consumer protection and environment, and social security. In fact, social security is very much national, but anyway, this principle is there. And that means that everything what we do in our fields and related fields aims at high level of protection of people and their rights and their health and their environment and conditions of living, including occupational safety and health. And therefore, European asbestos policy is also very strong, just because it is based on the constitutional provision on high level of protection. The very purpose of the whole ban, it is that we prevent by that the introduction of new asbestos to the work life and to the market. It is practically eliminating flow of new asbestos. But we still have a problem. We have a problem of existing asbestos in our societies, which is huge. For instance, in Finland, 200,000 tons of asbestos is in our buildings, in facilities, and it has to be removed. And so, ban is not enough. We need also demolition policy which should protect the workers efficiently, and that's very demanding. And our future exposures, even the countries with ban, happens in the demolition work, and we have to be very careful with that. The third issue is, of course, asbestos waste handling. As I told, we have had 200,000 tons of asbestos in Finnish buildings and environment, Finnish facilities. It will produce, when it is totally abolished, it will produce 5 million tons of asbestos contaminated waste, which have to be handled safely, and workers there should be protected effectively. So it is a big issue also to take care of existing asbestos in the society. In fact, first I have to say that US is not the white spot on the map in let's say as a whole, because you have a lot of regulation on asbestos already, but it's some way specific and let's say in certain extent is limited in the scope. But you have regulated asbestos effectively in some parts of the issues. But then I think this total ban, just because it is removing the introduction of new asbestos, it is extremely important, and it is not only important for legal purposes and regulatory purposes, it has also extremely important psychological effect, because it declares that asbestos is something which should not anymore be used. And I am happy to say that we have so many fantastic substitutes for asbestos that we don't need to use. In fact, in my mind, I used to repeat this often. Asbestos is outdated, old-fashioned, dirty, impractical, ineffective material compared to the modern solutions. I could have dozens of examples how it is easy to compare. So asbestos is not, as it was advertised for decades, it's not a queen of materials. It is, let's say, orphan material which should be removed.
We, whether it's ICO and ADAO or the Finnish Institute, how can ADAO better collaborate with you, your colleagues, and the community? What do you recommend?
In fact, we speak nowadays on networking, and professional networks are growing. In fact, I have a feeling that we have underutilized the opportunities provided by modern networking in field of occupational health and safety. My first point is that we should strengthen our networking to make use of all the possibilities which we can have in practically almost real-time communication, learning from each other, sharing materials, sharing experiences, and so on. What happens in USA today can be very easily be known in afternoon in Finland, and vice versa. So we are not probably most effective in this field, and therefore occupational health field should take an action in this, occupational safety and health as well. And for instance, NIOS information would be most valuable for other countries, but they often don't know. We have a little bit bias that we think when we put something in the net, then it is known by everybody, but it is not the case. We should do something more. Secondly, of course, we should work for support of international organizations, ILO and WHO, in the, I would like to say, very sound asbestos policies, and support the ratification of ILO convention, partly consideration of ILO recommendation from 2006, taking seriously WHO ILO joint program for elimination of asbestos-related diseases. And I think EU regulations, EU directives on asbestos, they show good examples also for governments, how to put it more to the national practices and so on. These all should be shared and discussed actively and educated, not only for experts, but also for politicians and let's say decision makers, industries, trade unions and so on. We may be biased in working actively in asbestos field, that everything is known. It's surprising how less is known about real risk of asbestos in many countries. I've just been in Asia and advising governments there, and I have been so surprised how the risks of asbestos are not yet realized. Another important point which I would like to say, that by doing this asbestos policy we have done, and I can use of course Finland as an example, which I think I know a bit about. We have not only defended our workers, we have not only defended our, let's say, occupational health and public health principles and objectives, we have defended also our industries and our employers very, very effectively. In fact, we have sometimes been in a position to defend them against themselves. And that's very important to understand. On the long term, we defend everyone. This is a win-win-win situation, not, let's say, unbalanced situation. And that I am very happy that the world starts to learn that nowadays.
Tell me how you feel with so much knowledge that the Asian propaganda penetrates through China, Vietnam. How do you feel about this propaganda?
I feel guilty, because it is the indication of our ineffectiveness in advocacy. And one of the key issues in public health is advocacy. ADAO is very good in advocacy, and I think the whole world would learn on your experience and your efficiency in advocacy. And as I said, I have been visiting rather frequently in Asian countries in, let's say, past 5-10 years, including China, Vietnam, Thailand, Korea and other countries. Some of them are taking very well the lessons from industrialized countries and doing very good job. But some of them really need a lot of stimulus and advice. And I think if we can get governments, professional associations and NGOs to work for better awareness of asbestos-related risks, then the, let's say, unindependent propaganda and advocacy would be weakened. And again, I would like to emphasize that we are also working for their protection, not only for our interest. Information is important, but it's not the only one. We need some other points, and it is a list of aspects we should take into consideration. And now I refer to my dear colleague Sir Donald Acheson, who was one Director General of Health in UK government. We need regulation, enforcement, inspection, education and information. This is the list of actions which should be included in all policies.
What does receiving this award mean to you the Dr. Salakoff Lifetime Achievement Award?
Oh, this is a very touching question. First, of course, I am honored. Secondly, I think it doesn't belong only for me personally, but for all my colleagues and Finnish Institute, Finnish probably asbestos policy. In that way, Finnish government gets also the part of that, the whole Finnish occupational health and safety community. Without them, I had been nothing. So I have to say that this is not only my policy or my line of research. Then I think it is also obligation for us. It is not only honor and let's say nice to receive, but it is also obligating us to continue according to the lines Professor Selikoff was representing, which means that we follow those ethical principles, we base our activities on sound scientific evidence, and we take the responsibility to take care that practical actions in policy, in practice, in services, in training and education and information are also undertaken. So we cannot live this only to luxury of taking an award, but it is also obligating and calling us to do more.